Corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Report to the boss, complain to the boss. Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, for the news media, the challenge is like doing a double flip off a diving board. That is, covering an ever-changing world. At the same time, the industry is ever-changing itself. We pause tonight to take a special look at news gathering and where the process is heading, including changes at newspapers, new TV technology, declining newsroom staffs, the impact of the internet, and the condition of periodicals, as well as pot shots from Washington. We'll even try to predict some future trends. On the masthead for this special show about the news media are our informed sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate; Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist; and Kurt Sprang, reporter and anchor, WGNO-TV, Channel 26. Okay, I'm going to throw it on out there first to Kathy. I mean, all of us professionals in news media having quite a few years in the business, and we've seen some changes. One of the big changes, certainly, that we are seeing is the staffing of newsrooms. It just seems to be fewer and fewer and fewer people there to cover the news. And
you said it. We've all seen it. We've been in the business for a long time, and I can't think of a year going back. It's been a long time since it didn't happen that you had to do more with less. Every single year, your publisher, your editor, whoever was telling you, okay, we've got to do more, but unfortunately we have fewer staff, and we're going to have even fewer by the time the year ends. We've been under that kind of pressure for a long time. News organizations have. I think I was really struck by it in particular this year. When you look at what's gone on with the national media, in a huge election year, we've had a huge election campaign, and then the presidency, the Trump administration took off like a ball of fire. I mean, it was just one thing happening after another, and it continues. It has been that way through the first several months of this administration, and you think that I have great sympathy with the national press that's been trying to cover everything that's going on. And it's just amazing, because I think it was the New York Times came out initially and said that they were making a commitment. They were adding several $1 million to their budget simply in order to cover the administration adequately. But at the same time they were doing that, they were also cutting staff, cutting some like copy editors and layers of people they would try to get along without. So that's a very interesting situation to be in. And I think you could look at almost all the organizations, and you can look at the wire services, look at AP, Reuters, all of which are doing a great job with covering the national administration, the national political scene, but they're really scrambling. They're just really scrambling, and they really have to work hard at it.
I think a part of that has a big impact is with that you have increasing loss of memory among news staffs. You have more of the greener people. And for a newsroom to work, you need somebody like Gordon that can kind of tell them some history, or like Kurt, can talk back and explain to these people who Dutch Boreal was, those kind of things. And I think the reporting staffs are just greener and less experienced and less knowledgeable.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, another thing to build on what Kathy said too is I think that the challenge for metro news organizations like where Kurt and I work, for instance, is much different than for the nationals. And I mean, one of the challenges for us is, our potential audience is so much smaller than, it's 1.5 million people who live around New Orleans, whereas the New York Times has a worldwide audience potentially. And so for them, the possibility of digital subscriptions in particular has been a real boon. And I think the Post and the Times in particular have benefited from, there's a lot of interest in what's going on in Washington right now, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. And they've been getting a lot of people to pay a modest amount to be digital subscribers, but I mean, they're drawing from the entire United States and really the world. And
it's really only those kinds of organizations that can get by with that kind of thing.
Exactly.
and really make money and charge subscriptions at a reasonable rate for web business.
Organizations that are trying to cover a city or a metropolitan area have a whole different set of challenges, because even if we were able to charge people a modest sum of money to subscribe to our product, it wouldn't add up in the same way that it does for the New York Times.
So these changes in both of you guys in local newsrooms, news operations, in terms of, are you seeing, one, a staffing impact? Are you seeing now less people in your newsrooms? And then secondly, how are these changes impacting how you guys deliver the news to the people? Because that's the important thing, is the news that you are delivering to the readers, the viewers out there.
I think that, we're talking business models for sure affecting this. And from a TV standpoint, let's say that, you're going to buy a TV station. You say, I'm going to call it K Kavanaugh, and we're going to have a great TV station. And we have all these great shows that advertisers are going to line up to pay to have their ads run on. And so you buy this TV station with this network affiliation, and then all of a sudden, those shows are all available online. And then all of a sudden, you're not the first source anymore, And I tell people, ask a young person, certainly under 20, even 25 for that matter, what was the last time that they watched a show when it aired that wasn't sports or wasn't an award show? When was the last time you watched it live?
We're seeing maybe a couple of lights flashing here, but we're doing okay right now. We keep up with the conversation. In this day of, of television news and print news, as we said, have to keep up with the changes. So back to the question that I presented to you, the important thing is getting the news, getting it right. Mm-hmm. Being a credible journalist, getting it out to the people.
Yeah, I mean, it's as Kathy said at the beginning, it's always doing more with less. I mean, I would say things have stabilized somewhat in the last few years in terms of our staffing levels, but they're still, a little bit smaller every year probably. And when I think back to when I used to be at the Times-Picayune, and we had 25 reporters maybe covering just the city, and then, by the time I left the Times-Picayune, we had maybe 10. So it's a big difference, and everybody has to hustle, and people have to multitask, and you don't have as much time you have to take pictures, and you have to take video, and you have to tweet, and you have to do all these things. And you don't have as much time for things like source development and, taking people out to lunch and meeting them for coffee and trying to really get deeper into things. I mean, I think one of the sort of paradoxes of all this is that, investigative reporting and deep reporting can suffer as a result of all this, but at the same time, that's the one thing I think people are really willing to pay for. And the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's based on press releases or that stuff is not as valuable. It's important. I mean, going to the city council meeting and saying what happened today and covering the mayor's speech and covering a murder, and I'm not saying those things aren't important, but the reporting that really takes a lot of heavy lifting is what I think people are more apt to be willing to pay for in the long run.
And of course, one thing that seems like a good development is a couple of tie-ins with TV stations. Like Advocate has the tie-in with Channel 4, Channel 8 has the tie-in with the Picayune, and that seems like a big. And there was a time when newspapers didn't acknowledge that TV existed and vice versa. Okay? And now you have the tie-in. That seems like a healthy thing.
It's been a great thing for us, I think, and it's been it's sort of everybody wins kind of a thing. Like we run some of the WWL writers write stories that run in our newspaper, and we sometimes appear on their station, and actually we've got something in the works where we're hoping to appear a lot more on their newscasts. And we think it'll help us both. We'll get more visibility, and our stories will find a wider audience, and we really don't lose anything. And it's the same thing for them. And by the time their story is published in the newspaper, either somebody saw it on the news last night or they didn't, but they're really not taking anything away from themselves.
And well, we certainly have seen some changes, certainly in this market and markets all over the country in newspapers and newspapers closing or whatever. We still, in this market, are still, you mentioned investigative, you guys doing investigative and WWL and certainly NOLA.com and the WVUE, everybody is still really doing some serious investigative work.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And it's sort of remarkable that we have a 2-newspaper town still, which if you had asked me, 4 years ago now when I went over to the Advocate, I didn't think that we'd have this for such a long time. I thought one of these two papers is probably going to not be here in a few years.
You know, I think one of the good things that's happened out of this is that editors have become even more focused than before on what is really important to cover and what do the people need to know and what is our mission here. And, you know, that's always been an editor's job, to look at that and what should we be covering today and tomorrow. But when you have fewer resources and you know that you have a lot to cover, it really focuses you. And I think that's one reason we're seeing more investigative, is that you know, editors and publishers and owners to some extent realize that that's really, really important. And you look at the national scene right now and look what's going on and just think how valuable a lot of that reporting is that we didn't necessarily have a few years ago. And it's not that people suddenly discovered it's important. I mean, not that editors suddenly discovered it. It's just they've been forced to really focus on what is the most important thing. And it comes down to some of those choices.
That's true. I mean, I think the peril in some of this is that, you know, there's a slippery slope where you just report on things that people want to read, and those things might be...
And that you can get to.
And they might be really unimportant things, but there's stories we all know are going to find a big audience, you know, and they might not be very important stories. And so the question is, do you have to resist the temptation to just chase those kind of stories, and sometimes you have to tell stories that may not be the most well-read stories, but are the stories that people have always depended on local media to get to and to tell them because they're important.
And in the world of television, we really have seen some changes too in how the news is gathered in terms of the people in your newsroom, number one, talking about staffing again, and then the crews that have been sent out to cover stories. We're seeing that maybe get a little smaller.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, there are a number of reasons for that. Just let's talk about the crews that go out. You know, it used to be, when I got into this business, the recorder was this giant 40-pound thing. It was on a strap. It went over your shoulder. You had an umbilical cord to this camera you had over your and carried on your shoulder. And so you would often have a photographer who they may be very good at shooting video, but certainly was very good at carrying equipment. And then you had a reporter. Now, the gear is tiny. It's very tiny. And so if somebody can go out on their own and shoot the video and also report, well, then that's one less, that's another person you could pay to do the same thing somewhere else. So in some respects, I know that staffs are getting smaller, but I have to tell you, ours isn't significantly smaller so much as we all can do a wider variety of things. I do a Wheel of Justice report. We do it every Monday and Wednesday. You know who shoots it? I shoot it. I have a little DSLR camera, and I shoot it myself. I shoot my stand-up myself. I do it myself. And you know what? I really enjoy it. It's great. It's a good time. But you know, there's social media comes into play here. The web comes into play. There's so many other things as well.
Yeah, we're going to definitely be discussing that too. One thing I wanted to ask you guys, what had been called the citizen journalist. I don't know if we're still calling him citizen journalist, but I certainly see TV and then even print using photos, perhaps that people are sending in. You know, you have severe weather and ask people to send in, and so that's having an impact too.
Pictures and video now, of course, and sometimes that stuff's great. I mean, I would say the flip side to what Kurt's saying is, you know, sometimes they're asking, you know, reporters to shoot pictures with their stories and so forth. And, you know, a lot of us, we do it, but we're not great at it, you know. And I mean, I have a lot of respect for some of the great photojournalists I work with, and I, you know, feel like I'm terrible compared to, I mean, I can shoot a picture that shows this is what the city council meeting looked like, but I guarantee you it'll be a terrible picture.
There is a real value to photographers.
So, you're coachable.
Yeah, well, yeah. So
when you're doing it all too, when you're shooting and you're out there as a reporter, does it sometimes get to be a little bit too much? I mean, can you pay enough attention to the story that's going on?
I think that's where you have, from a management standpoint, you have to identify what people are doing and get an idea of whether they're going to need backup or not. You know, it's very hard if somebody, you know, this is pretty, I mean, finite example, but it's very hard if you're going to cover somebody pleading guilty at federal court for one person to do that because there are two entrances to the building.
Well, yeah, obviously you're going to have to send out more crews.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are just things you have to take into consideration. That's probably the simplest decision, one of the simplest decisions that you have to make.
Okay, well, you touched on something. Obviously, the internet, we know it is out there and it's having a real tremendous impact in the distribution of information. It's making it immediate and much more widespread.
Well, if anybody thought it was a passing fad, let me tell you, it's here to stay. Okay. I think a good example of the impact is if you look at the last few weeks with the monument controversy, when the statues were going down, those nights, you had all those messages that were going through on the internet saying, there are trucks gathering around and there are police gathering and people were talking about it. And then I know the Advocate was doing a lot of twittering as that was happening, and so this was all things that wasn't covered in the conventional way that we're used to. And so that was a good kind of internet type of story. It was the live coverage that was there. It wasn't worth, I guess, interrupting live TV coverage, but you could just stand there and do it. But also you saw the impact of social media with the Beauregard statue when the next day when somebody spotted it at a police salvage yard and someone took a picture and all of a sudden that went around town too. So that was a real internet type of story. I'm still a guy though who believes passionately in newspapers, and when it comes down to the big story, something that you want to unfold and read and go down all the details, there's still nothing like a newspaper. And so when the Picayune cut back, they were saying...
I couldn't agree more, by the way.
Yeah. Well, no, I think a newspaper plays a great value, and I hope people, appreciate that. But another element that I think is really important is with blogging. That blogging has just it's created this whole new era of people who are commenting on things, and some of them, well, none of them really have the restrictions that journalists do. I mean, people can say a lot of different things, but there's some areas of information, again, with the monuments thing, that there's a lot of information that you were getting from some of the blogs that you weren't getting in the mainstream in the mainstream news media. And so it's had a big impact in that way too.
So that leads me then to a question. I mean, how much are what we call the mainstream media? How many leads are you getting from social media? You're looking at Facebook, Instagram, from the blogs, and do you find that's providing you with?
I think it's a significant source. I think it's a significant source of what's going on. And certainly, keep in mind, so many of the social media feeds are based on an algorithm, which means the more that they get shared, then the more it's going to wind up in people's news feeds. The more it gets liked, the more it's going to wind up in people's news feeds. So often, by the time it gets to you, it's got a pretty good following already. And you can certainly find out what people might be interested in finding out about, just based on what's popular on social media. The word is trending. What's trending on Facebook? What's trending on Twitter?
That doesn't mean it's newsworthy.
That right. It doesn't, but you get a certain good indication, and it often is newsworthy.
It is.
But go ahead, Aaron.
Well, it was a great discovery in terms of iPhones, especially. Remember the day when the tornadoes hit? There were tornadoes all over town. All of a sudden, people were getting beeps on their that they didn't even know they had. Yeah. I mean, all around the community, people were being notified. And that was really, I think that was the first time the system was tested here, and that was just another element of it.
Well, Gordon, with all of these different sources that we're talking about and things that are trending and sort of capturing not only the public's attention, but people in the news media, how does all of this impact just the basic responsibility of journalism to cover both sides, to be credible in what you're delivering, and to get it as right as possible?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, that's still the basic job, and I think, the pressures on us are to be faster and all that, but I mean, we try to not put stories up that we don't feel like are responsible and where we at least haven't contacted everybody. If it's a story that involves a controversy, we want to at least have tried to talk to the different people involved. Now, we sometimes will publish a story where we haven't heard back from everybody yet, depending on the specific facts of the story. But everyone should have an opportunity to be heard in those kinds of stories, everybody who's involved. I mean, I think that the basics, we used to have these discussions at the Times-Picayune when we were undergoing this digital transformation there. And, there was a sort of a debate about whether the digital revolution was really a revolution or an evolution. I would always argue that it was an evolution. Basically, what we're doing is the same as what we've always done, finding stuff out, sorting out the wheat from the chaff and then telling people what we found out.
I think it's an evolution for reporters, I think it's a revolution for people who on the street, because you talked about how anybody can send in photos, and with your cell phone, you are a one-man, a one-woman newsroom. You can shoot video, edit video, post to social media, post to a website, and people in the general public have the exact same power with the same tool. So for them, it's revolutionary. For us, I believe it's evolutionary.
I mean, the basics of what we do is still we have to put out a responsible news report, and the tools change, and the things get faster, and the methods change, but the basics of the job are still the basics of the job, and the same ethics still apply, and all that.
So what then can the media do to assure the public that that is being done, that all efforts
That we're not
are
fake
being
news.
taken? Yes, because that's where I'm leading to. Because certainly journalism and news media has really been under the attack. Not that they haven't been criticized before, because they have, sometimes with good reason, other times not so. It's just because somebody didn't like the fact that we reported something about them that they didn't want reported. But the responsibility is still there among journalists to do it as credibly as possible, to get it right. What can the field of journalism do to assure the public that every effort is being taken to do that?
I think you just continue doing what, standing by the principles that journalists have always stood by, good journalists, and that's to be fair and to be accurate. Accuracy is paramount, of course, and to cover what's needed, what the people need to know. And really, again, that goes back to an editorial judgment about what do the people need to know. And I think the difficulty now is that the profession has come under so much more pressure. And this, it started at the national level, definitely, and it's largely political. It definitely is in the rise of Fox News, which came out of really, look at Roger Ailes, and building an organization really around a political viewpoint. There's no question that that's how Fox News, became what it is today. And that had never been done before, really. I mean, you could say that a lot of people would see bias in the media before, but until Fox News came along, you didn't have such a structured situation where you're actually an organization representing a political viewpoint.
And then there are others that have evolved along too,
that
the other kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, and evolved, but it became a more normal situation, or some people regard it as more normal. True journalists, journalists who went to school to learn the profession and really stand by their principles of that profession, don't do that, I would say, and don't regard that as a good basis for journalism. But that's put the public perception of what journalists do and how they do it has changed just dramatically because of that. And so it makes it hard. It comes down to the local level, too. It really does, because people look at you differently, and they don't. I think what you have to worry about is will young people go into the profession for the right reasons now, and for the reasons that really matter to the larger public.
Errol?
But when people talk about presenting both sides of an issue, first of all, some issues have more than two
Many sides.
Yeah, many sides. Some issues seem to have like one side and kind of, and the other sides are fairly trivial. But it's hardly any issue that the two sides, if there are two sides, are 50-50%. Okay,
right?
That they're even. Okay, and there are some issues I can think about where there's just a clear evidence on one side, and the other side is some guy who doesn't know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that guy doesn't know what he talks about gets a lot of press because he's the one guy that's out there that gets a lot of attention. And to me, that's almost as much of a problem too. That because of that,
false equivalency.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so. And it's at that point, I mean, you got to concede that the media have to make a judgment at some point.
Well,
they have to make some kind of quality judgment.
People don't always understand about when there's these debates about bias in media that, it's not the media's job to just give half of the time to this side and half the, your job is to be discerning, and you have to hear both sides, but then ultimately you've got to make some judgments about all the facts that you've gathered, and, you might, if it's like you said, one crazy guy and a bunch of people who know what they're talking about, maybe the crazy guy gets one comment at the end of the story or something, but it's not our job to just sort of pass the mic around and let everybody have a say. I mean, we're supposed to actually find things out and tell people what we found out.
And I know, Errol, you wanted to talk about periodicals too.
Well, because I'm kind of in the magazine business, I guess. But a few years ago, people were saying, they were saying newspapers are dying, and thank God they're not. And they were saying that magazines are dying. And I could tell you, when you read the publications a few years ago, or the journals, you go to the conferences, the people in the magazine industry were really feeling pretty gloomy about it. Now there's more optimism in the industry, and I think what people are feeling is that what's really in trouble is national magazines, national publications, because the web can absorb all of that information. And what is shown to have the most staying power is local. because that's not what the web goes after. And so local publications are having a better time in surviving all this. Plus, they've got the ability, in the same way I was saying, like newspapers, like being able to open and fill the pages with magazines. You can still have color pictures of homes and that sort of thing. And so there's a little bit more optimism in that side of the industry than there used to be.
You know, I guess the whole basic discussion here is, I mean, we've been in the media, we believe in the media, we believe in delivering solid, good journalism. And, you know, there, I think, is a concern that maybe people aren't believing in the journalism as much. So the message what would you all want to import in the importance of the free press? What would you say?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think it's fundamental to our democracy and to an informed society. And there's always going to be some people who don't believe in what we're doing, but I think there are always going to be people who do. And I think it's our job to just keep our heads down and do what we're doing. And I think having an informed citizenry depends on it.
Echo?
I agree with that. I also will tell you that I think, so much of this is social media related. Because that's where the one crazy guy is getting his biggest voice, right, is on social media. And I think what's going to happen, and maybe harder for us, not as hard for our kids, to make sure that the people of our age are savvy consumers of news. My daughter has grown up with nothing but social media. When was the last time she turned on a TV? I don't know. What does she need a TV for? She's got everything on her pad.
On a little small screen. Yeah,
there's two screens in every room. There's the TV and there's this one, and they're both on all the time.
Right. Okay, so that leads me then to the end of this discussion, which is, what are the trends? Errol, start with you.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about, and that may be significant, the trend is radio. There was a time, especially AM radio was a very powerful medium in terms of news, and I think we're seeing more and more the decline of radio, especially on the AM side. It's tend to be some of the great broadcasting outlets are now those frequencies are like religious broadcasting or things where you buy your time. There will always be a WBL AM radio. I mean, WBL plays an important function in the community in terms of reach and news. But I just think we'll see more and more decline of AM radio.
All right, Gordon?
I mean, this is less of a prediction, and I think the fundamental question facing a lot of us in the media is how are we going to monetize the internet better, which is something that we just haven't done well, and whether it's going to be through an app where people pay for it or a subscription model of some sort, a digital subscription model. I think whoever figures that out is going to win.
And the business end is important.
Yes.
Yeah. Kathy?
I'm going to predict that freelancers like me will become increasingly valuable as time goes on. I spent many years in a newsroom and as an editor in both print, in magazine and newspaper, and have been a freelancer now for about 10 years or so. And I've been increasingly busy during that period, and I think it's because a lot of the organizations are, they have fewer resources. They're relying on experienced people who are out there and available. And so I think there is that, as long as you've got experienced people out there.
Right side for freelancers. Kurt, real quick.
And a lot more live video on social media. Things are going to come to you live. You're going to see more things live. You won't have to wait for news broadcasts or even internet stories.
So it's going to keep evolving. We haven't seen the end of it yet.
Oh, no.
Not at all.
Just getting started.
Thanks, guys, for a good discussion. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.